Ladies and gentlemen, today I have a very fun video comparing three separate stocks: SoFi, Nubank, and then Block Incorporated. But more specifically, I'm talking about Cash App. Whenever we're talking about Block Incorporated, we're going to be cutting out the technology platforms for both SoFi Technologies whenever it comes to their, Galileo and Technisys, as well as Block Incorporated for Square, their e-commerce and point of sale terminals. That being said, we're really just touching up on the newest style banks and fintechs to see how they actually compare and the styles of businesses that they're actually going after. Very interesting things that I found. So let's go take a look. Let me bring up the first tab, okay? And then we're going to go through all the actual visualizations just so then we don't have to be staring at the numbers on this spreadsheet. I brought up a couple charts as well to visualize this even easier. Whenever looking at the amount of customers that each of these businesses have, okay, what you can see is that SoFi customers from Q2 of 2021 all the way to Q1 of 2023 have more than doubled from 2.5 million to 5.6 million up here. Now, Nubank, on the other hand, has went from 41 million to 69 million in Q1 of 2023, already surpassing actually, from what we know, 81 million new customers as of current day right now. But obviously, Q2 for their numbers have not released yet. Cash App, on the other hand, actually only reports on active customers, for which they said between Q2 of 2021 to Q1 of 2023, 40 to 53 million monthly active users. Now, whenever it comes to their actual member counts, it's estimated to be anywhere around 80 to 85 million users. However, a lot of those people might not be as active as they are today. So it's really hard to get an accurate prediction on where those numbers are. That being said, I compared them in terms of actual percentages whenever we look at different customer amounts. Whenever we're comparing things like Nubank versus SoFi, SoFi has actually been closing that gap currently, or at Q2 of 2021, there were only 16 times more customers at New than only 14 times. Comparatively to Cash App, they were at almost 16 times as well. Now only 10 times. But Nubank versus Cash App, well, this is quite interesting. At whenever we first started this study at Q2 of 2021, they were very similar in customer counts, but as it actually went forward, Nubank has propelled drastically. So they continue to keep growing newer and newer customers with actually higher activity rates than Block and Cash App as well. So quite interesting. Let me just jump into revenue and we'll scoot along much faster than this, okay? Now, revenue and these growth rates underneath them is where it really starts to get quite crazy. SoFi versus Nubank, okay, which was the original video that I had posted like this, what you could see was that SoFi just wasn't growing nearly as fast as Nubank. Nubank has just been exploding in terms of growth rates. And whenever you actually add on Cash App this time, it doesn't seem to be any different, right? Nubank is still extremely compelling, being half the amount of revenue than Cash App back in Q2 to being, almost 500 million more than them by Q1 of 2023. The growth rates here are just insane. Now, I've excluded the Bitcoin revenues by the cost of the Bitcoin costs. Okay. So this is actually their real revenue, including what they make from Bitcoin, but not the actual purchasing and selling of the actual asset. So this is their true revenue from Cash App. That being said, whenever looking at the differences of these companies, it's quite interesting. But I don't just want to bore you with a bunch of these statistics. We'll actually be diving deeper into that. And you can't see it from this tab, but let me switch it over here. I have a tab down here, all for visualizations down in the left-hand corner here. So as you can tell right here, okay, so we'll be looking at all the charts for all of these numbers that paints a much better picture, okay? That being said, revenue per member. I want to make this very, very clear, okay? SoFi, or actually, you know what? I'll wait a little bit. Let's just go and take a look really quick, okay? SoFi's per member is much higher than the rest of them. Okay. Much higher than Nubank's, much higher than Cash App's. But in terms of the growth rates on their, revenue per member, it's not quite the same. SoFi has been sort of similar to where they were back in Q2 of 2021, little bits of growth, but it's kind of stagnant up and down. Okay. This is because before, back in Q2, there was a much higher reliance on their lending platform. And then as they've actually brought it more over to financial services, that's really boosted up their number of clients. But then obviously that lowers the reliance on lending, which actually sort of balances out that, average revenue per member. Nubank and Cash App come from a completely different field. They started as a one product, low revenue style business. And as they've scaled, they've only gotten into higher revenue streams, like getting into the credit cards, getting into lending, getting into buy now, pay later, these sorts of things that have, propelled their clients further. Same thing with Cash App, getting into like Bitcoin purchases and stuff. It has really ramped up their average revenue per user. Now, in terms of the actual comparisons, I'm going to leave this for the visualizations as well. As you know what, it might be better to just see it on a chart rather than just looking at all these comparisons. Now, customer acquisition cost to me was the most important. Not only because whenever we're talking about the next sort of thing here, that who can acquire the customers for cheapest, but also how good is that customer acquisition cost for what your average revenue per user is. So I kind of broke this down into a CAC to ARPU efficiency, which means customer acquisition cost to average revenue per user efficacy. Now, here it is. You can tell by immediately, if you start looking at these numbers, SoFi spends a ton to acquire customers. That being said, their CAC to ARPU ratio is actually quite good whenever you're looking at banking stocks at around 20%. That is quite amazing. Okay. Then you look at Nubank and Cash App and realize they're in a completely different field. It's almost like unfair. Nubank, being one of the most spectacular companies I've ever looked at, acquires a company, even as of late, for about $4 per customer, but then actually can monetize that customer in the matter of a single quarter by nearly 5x. Okay, they're monetizing that customer so fast, and even the longer the customer stays on, the more they'll actually monetize them, even though they only had to acquire them once. Okay, Cash App, very similar story. Acquiring a customer for $9.36 as of the last quarter, very similar across all quarters. Similarly with Nubank, where SoFi's customer acquisition cost has gone up, Nubank and Cash Apps has stayed quite stagnant across the entire time. Now, their average revenue per user has not, so that's sort of changed their efficacy along the way. Like I said, I don't want to bore you with all of these ridiculous statistics, but as we actually go through and into the visualization platform or into the visualization side of this spreadsheet, we'll break that all down. But going on to net income, let's take a look. Net income will have to include everything that we look at, like SoFi, Galileo, financial services, lending, all that stuff. Nubank is one big bank, and that's essentially their entire platform, which also does give them an advantage whenever comparing them just this way. But then also, Block also includes Square, which does help. Now, the only company that's been profitable for the last 3 quarters has been Nubank. Cash App, as you can see back in Q2 of 2021, when Bitcoin was quite strong, they also hit a large amount of profitability as a percentage of how much actual revenue they were bringing on, about 110%. But then, like I said, whenever we look at SoFi and Block, they have not been profitable for some time. However, Block has been staying quite close, 99%. You're right at that threshold to turn positive. SoFi also very close back here at around 88%, 61%, now to just 92%. It's extremely close to profitability, but still not quite nearly as close as Block, and obviously not as profitable as Nubank. Before we go on to the visualizations, or yeah, I'll do it this way. I did also want to reference that there are valuations whenever it comes to these companies. Okay. Very, very different whenever looking at these companies. Let me just put my thing. Actually, let me do that. Yeah. Okay. So whenever looking at these, what you can tell is that the market cap for SoFi is much below the other two. Okay. We also have to understand the geographies that they play in as well, because it does play a large part. Is that the affluent clients that are available in America are, well, I just said it, much more affluent than the people in Latin America. They're a higher average revenue per user client, and not only if Block is getting that high average revenue per user now, they can because the clients actually have that income sort of coming in. So as they attract those clients more and more, that average revenue per user can climb much higher than Nubank's ever could, just because GDP there is much lower. That being said, their market caps for Nubank and Cash App are quite close, but also for SoFi, there's a long leeway, lots of growth there that can actually happen. SoFi is not profitable, haven't been profitable. Forward PE does not exist. The other two have, you know, quite high, but also a little bit different of forward P ratios. Price to sales, honestly, Block and Nubank have quite similar price to sales ratios, very high. Block seems like it's low because of that Bitcoin purchasing and selling. They'd probably be at around a 10 price to sales as well, excluding Bitcoin. Price to book as well. Nubank is just in another field. It's a very expensive company, but as you actually look at the visualizations, you'll get to see, you'll get to visualize exactly why they're being priced so high. SoFi still nearly quite a deal. This was less than 1 times price to book not too long ago. Now at 1.5 times, further growth still doesn't quite put it into perspective, but showing how people are actually holding this company held by insiders and held by institutions, you can tell that the insiders for SoFi and New are still extremely strong. Block has had some management changes, some insiders selling as well. Makes up for a much lower percentage of the overall holdings, but actually the highest whenever it comes to institutional holdings. And SoFi becomes the lowest, and by a long shot. It's actually quite a small percentage of institutions that are holding SoFi, whereas New and Block have very healthy institutional holdings. And then same thing with shorting. Of this 37%, 14% of it is actually being shorted. Honestly close to being a hated stock, whereas Nubank and Block, it's all quite long individuals and barely anyone betting on it, especially Nubank. No one is betting against that management team. And maybe some of it is due to the next two parts here, cash and debts. As you can tell, SoFi and Block both sort of hovering, not nearly near where they need to be, versus Nubank's just absolute cash heavy business, able to acquire businesses, low debts, obviously able to pay off that debt if they needed to. All quite exciting. Now, are you guys ready? That's been a whole mouthful. Why don't we jump into the visualization? So what I do need to do, I just need to set this to 110%. Okay, hopefully, and I will, what is going to make it biggest, but yet can be seen? I'll switch between this and this. How about that? So looking at the actual customer count trends of what we're looking at, the one over on the left here, what we can tell is that, well, essentially, Nubank has not stopped growing. They continue to grow at insane paces, whereas Cash App a little bit slower, and SoFi being just a tiny little player in this space, however, still growing their users quite fast, actually doubling in that time frame that we've been looking at. This is where you can actually see the growth rates, where SoFi, being the blue marker at the top, does actually hold some of the highest growth rates, but also a very smaller player. Whereas Nubank just being a little bit behind, but still at 80 million users. It's crazy that they're holding up that high of a growth rate, quarter over quarter of like 6%, whenever you're talking about 80 million users. Unbelievable, right? That being said, whenever comparing them, this is the one that I said we should look at the differences, right? Going back, this is all the percentages. I know it's a little bit smaller now, but this is this section right here, the customer differences. Whenever visualizing it, what you can tell is that the customers in blue, this is comparing Nubank to SoFi. SoFi has been making, you know, a good improvement, but even a better improvement in red whenever you're comparing it to Cash App, making that, customer count differences. Now, what I think is most important is the Nubank versus Cash App down here in the yellow, where Cash App has not been able to acquire customers nearly as fast as Nubank. This is due to the lower customer acquisition costs. This is due to, the profitability of the companies and everything like this. In terms of revenue, I'll switch back. Revenue trends, Nubank once again skyrocketing past the competition. However, SoFi and Cash App also doing amazing over their terms. It's just Nubank is on a completely other level, actually being, you know, uh, close to SoFi in Q2 of 2021, way outmatched by Cash App in Q2 of 2021. Right here, sorry, I didn't have my mouse on the screen. All the way up, like whenever you compare it here, it's like, you know, Big Daddy Nubank. Holy. Same thing, you could tell here, the highest growth rates are at Nubank, still being the highest growth rate, even at, some of the lowest levels, or even at, the most recent quarters where they continue to grow at the fastest paces. Absolutely nuts. Revenue difference, okay? Comparing Nubank to SoFi, well, the difference has been more drastic in Nubank's favor, continuing to push out a higher and higher difference. This company is completely differentiating itself from their competitors. Um, Cash App and SoFi, actually, SoFi is gaining a little bit, as you can tell by the trend sort of heading on a downward slope there in red. Hopefully, you guys can see that just right there. And then obviously Cash App versus Nubank. Nubank is actually still propelling way faster than Cash App. So really, it's Cash App it's Nubank that's standing out. Cash App kind of falling behind a little bit in their lead at, once we saw revenue back in Q2 of 2021. This is excluding Bitcoin, mind you. But not the actual profits that they make from Bitcoin, but just the costs of the actual asset. So this is as clean of accounting as you could possibly do, especially whenever we're removing all the customer acquisition costs and stuff like this. Like whenever we actually, like for example here, revenue per member. A lot of people are just taking the average revenue for SoFi and then just, dividing it out per their amount of members. You got to take out the technology platform or else we're not getting a clear number. We have to take out Square or else we're not getting a clear number on Cash App side. And also the sales and marketing for the customer acquisition cost has to be Cash App specific. But on to revenue per member, what you can tell is that SoFi has been bringing on very stagnant numbers of revenue per member, whereas Nubank has been skyrocketing, Cash App increasing a little bit. Revenue per member in terms of growth, Nubank is continuously being some of the highest growers, Cash App, and then actually the slowest is SoFi. You can tell that here. The differences between the companies in blue, SoFi versus Nubank, the competition, the gap is closing quickly. SoFi versus Cash App, it's also dropping once again. But Cash App versus Nubank, even Nubank is beating out on Cash App. Sorry, I'm in the way. My apologies, but you can see it there as the trend for SoFi down to Nubank is just absolutely incredible. It really is a company worth looking at. I know I keep pitching the stock and people tell me it's too expensive or they don't like Latin America. Well, you're missing out, my friends. Customer acquisition costs. Doesn't that chart tell you something, eh? Customer acquisition costs for SoFi has been growing. Not skyrocketing, but growing. Um, this is also, for reasons like trying to acquire customers into direct deposit, because once you acquire those customers the way SoFi is doing it, hopefully they won't leave. They're a very sticky client. Cash App and Nubank just on a completely other new level. And even you can tell that Nubank, although playing quite similarly whenever you're looking at SoFi as well, is about half the customer acquisition cost of Cash App as well. So quite exciting. You can tell that here as well in the actual customer acquisition to ARPU numbers. You can tell that, well, essentially Nubank is by far the most profitable compared to how much their actual customer acquisition cost is. Same with Cash App, and then SoFi is all the way down at the bottom there in terms of their growth rates. Um, yeah, we have to remember, and I'll talk more after this, but uh, net income differences as well. So this is actually for their net income. This is not for the payoff trends. I actually put that down there. This is for their net income, just showing which companies are the most profitable. Like I said, SoFi in the green and in the blue are still in the negatives. Nubank, however, starting to really break out and be quite a profitable company now in the last 3 quarters, which will allow them to expand even further. David Velez, the CEO, has even said that do not expect it to stay this net income positive because they want to pour it all back into the business to grow even faster. Now, These are the customer payoff trends. Okay. I'm going to try to, make this as simplistic as possible, but we're going to look at them all individually. So, first, we're looking at Nubank versus SoFi. Okay. What you can see here is the customer acquisition cost difference from new versus SoFi in the blue sections. Essentially, what you're looking at is that Nubank, as of Q1 of 2023, acquires a customer better than SoFi at about 1% of the cost, 1.1% of the cost. But yet, whenever they actually monetize those clients, this what I'm calling a CAC to ARPU efficacy is that they can actually monetize that client 25x better versus the total cost or CAC amount that they actually bring on. So Nubank is just excelling so unbelievably, even in these low ratios. Whenever they had high CAC costs, high sales and marketing expenses in these quarters, was still at a 700% efficacy ratio or 600% in certain quarters. But like even in their latest quarter, it's just absolutely spiking to the highest amounts, even whenever average revenue per user is at its highest. Guys, it's unbelievably crazy what we're looking at. Same thing for Cash App versus SoFi. The numbers aren't as drastic, but it still does come as a shock to know that, Cash App is bringing on a customer for about 2.4% of the cost of SoFi and then monetizing them better in terms of CAC about 12x. Okay. That trend for customer acquisition costs is actually getting lower, and that efficacy is actually getting higher, which means their ARPU is going up faster than SoFi's, and their CAC is going down faster than SoFi's. It's a competitive space for where Cash App and Nubank actually are. Comparing the two, though, Cash App and Nubank, the two excellences of these businesses is that essentially, whenever we look at Nubank winning in this, is that they acquire a customer for about 45% of the cost. Was a little bit higher in this quarter, but that was the only quarter where they actually paid any more than Cash App. But here, 45% of the cost to acquire a customer, and then they'll actually make back about 200% of the customer than what essentially Cash App is doing. They do actually have similar average revenue per users. So this is sort of the problem with this metric is that they have similar customer acquisition costs, but the average or the CAC cost is half the amount. So it's actually 200% the efficacy. Quite exciting. They're able to acquire a customer very, very well. This is essentially what I broke down. Now, I wanted to go back to the valuations here. Okay. SoFi is a lending first company. They are not this customer acquisition type model where they're bringing on the tens and tens of millions of customers per quarter. Like, well, I mean, they're not doing tens and tens, but millions of customers per quarter, like Nubank and Block are. However, SoFi has talked about actually going more towards the financial services side, bringing down those CAC costs and bringing up like 1 million new members per sign up. And then hopefully even actually, keeping those clients for longer. So then they're more active customers than the new banks and the blocks. Like, for example, if Nubank, like I said in the first part here, that if they're acquiring a customer and they get, essentially 85 million customers, but only 53 million of them stay, well, SoFi wants to do that a little bit better. Whenever they acquire a customer, they want them to stay. So they're willing to pay this super high amount to have them be a direct deposit user, which guarantees a high activity rate and guarantees an active customer. So different styles, different approaches. You guys can choose which ones you guys like out of them. And hopefully, some of the actual due diligence that we did in this video will help you guys understand which which businesses you'll actually like more than another. Now, like I said, I am highest in my investment in SoFi, Nubank being second, Cash App, then, well, actually PayPal, then Cash App. But yeah, Nubank is something else. Being able to acquire this many customers, having explosive revenue, revenue per member is growing, and then the customer acquisition cost stays flat is so hard to fathom. It's mind blowing to me. But I'll let you guys do more research on your own. If you guys want, you guys can go check out. I've done videos on Cash App. I've done videos on Nubank if you want to hear more than that. And obviously, I've made videos on SoFi. So thank you so much. Appreciate your time. But bye for now.